going on, everybody? I hope that you all are doing well, and I hope that everybody can hear me clearly, and that we don't have any issues with this YouTube or this stream. If you are listening on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, thank you for tuning in. As usual, we greatly appreciate it. If you are listening via podcast, then I want to welcome you to Mikasa Sukasa, and I am your host, Niko House. And it's been an interesting couple of days. Not a couple of days that I am particularly happy with. Well, I am happy that Mueller's investigation is fizzling out. However, I am not happy with the fact that the establishment has taken this opportunity to really double down, triple down, quadruple down, every single type of down you can think of. If you watched my post this morning, I even talked about Thomas Friedman claiming that the fact that Trump, quote unquote, won't do anything about this is problematic, and that because of the fact that he won't address the Russiagate scandal that is non-existent and absent of proof, because of that, he's not fit to be president. Now, with that being said, I can come up with thousands of reasons why Trump is probably not a good idea to be president. But if you want to remove someone from office and you do it under false pretense, then that is no better than pretty much rigging an election, is no better than what you claim the Russians are doing. So if the Russians did in fact rig our elections, would that really be worse than having it rigged from the inside? The Russians aren't claiming to be worried about my interests. I didn't elect the Russians. Okay? I didn't elect the Russians under the expectation that they're going to do what I asked them to because they are my representative and my tax dollars pay them. If the Russians deceive me, I'm not saying I expect it, but I would not consider that a bigger deal than my politicians, my representatives, my attorney general, Supreme Court, etc., etc. It would be a bigger deal for me if they screwed me over. So the idea that it's perfectly fine if our democracy does, or excuse me, if our representatives do it, then hey, what can you do? It's just politics. It's so crazy. So what you're telling me is, if you're an American, it's politics. If you're a random group based out of St. Petersburg, Virginia, and you happen to have Russian people who speak Russian working at that establishment, then it's an act of war. Apparently, that's what's being told. Now, the reason that I decided to finally address this is because I wanted to see what developed when it comes to like inflammatory comments, like the ones Bernie made. And that's by the way, I did the same thing with pretty much when it comes to inflammatory comments. There's usually more circumstance surrounding them depending on the person. So when Bernie makes an inflammatory comment about Russia or Syria, I'm a little hesitant to just jump on board because that's not something he's been known to do, if that makes sense. Nor has he been known to actively critique a person. You get my drift? So he critiques Trump ad hominem a lot, which isn't necessary because you can just critique his policies, which he does, but you don't have to critique Trump's personality. Actually, that's not even going to win you an election, as we've already seen. But Bernie's history, mind you, has never been one of personally attacking anybody. He didn't do that with Bush. He didn't do that with Obama. Obviously, he didn't do that with anybody. He's never done so. And so whenever I see uncharacteristic behavior from him, I have to kind of step back and like, what the hell? Now, I do want to be clear about something. Bernie Sanders, the tweets and the interview that he did with Chuck Todd were both problematic as hell. But there are some caveats that I think need to be recognized, and I think we can acknowledge two things at once, which I'll go into that in a little bit. But before I go into that, if you have not, I want to let you hear this interview with Chuck Todd. It's not one of Bernie's brightest moments. It's not one of Bernie's brightest moments. I'm gonna put it like that. But the show must go on. So, go ahead and check out this interview, and then we'll go into what I think about that, and then we're gonna go ahead and talk about the tweets as well.
The Progressive Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
Let me start with Russia, since I ended there, to keep the sort of the flow of the conversation going here. Your campaign, perhaps these Russians were told to leave it alone, that the only people that they were not to criticize were Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. I'm curious, did anybody in your campaign get interviewed by Mueller to just make sure your campaign had nothing to do with this?
Now, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in our campaign was interviewed. Mueller mentioned me twice, our campaign, twice in his report. And I think what he was talking about is kind of old news. It's what most Americans know, is that at the end of my campaign, when it appeared that Clinton was going to win, and certainly after she won the nomination, what the Russians were doing is flocking to Bernie Sanders' Facebook sites, and they were saying to Bernie Sanders supporters, as they were, by the way, to Black Lives Matter supporters, people who are fighting for social justice, as they were saying to the Muslim community, if you voted for Sanders, you have to understand Hillary Clinton is crazy, she's a murderer, she is terrible, all kinds of horrible, horrible things about Hillary Clinton.
Now I have to say something. And I know it sounds, people are going to laugh when I say it, but it's true nonetheless. When I have a question about something going on social media, and I mean this in all seriousness, people, when I have a question about something going on in social media, I don't call my grandma up. Or say if you had a question about cryptocurrency, right? I don't call my grandmother and say, hey, grandma, what do you think about international economics in regards to cryptocurrencies, the burden that cryptocurrency is putting on the petroleum-backed currency, or do you think that the cryptocurrency can control economic crash? How do you like? My grandma, beautiful as she is 75 years old. I'm just being real about it. And she has much more time on her hands than Bernie Sanders at 77 has on his hands. Maybe 76. The bottom line is Bernie Sanders don't have a Facebook page. Bernie Sanders was not involved in Facebook groups. Bernie Sanders doesn't even know what the ads say, nor will he know how to look them up. Because if he knew how to look up this stuff, if he was actively involved in these things, he wouldn't be saying this stuff. So I think this is a clear example of don't speak about what you don't understand, because he said the Russians were going to Bernie Sanders' Facebook sites and saying all kinds of things about Hillary Clinton. And I'm like, Facebook sites? Oh, that's not good. If Bernie read the indictment... Oh, actually, somebody on the YouTube live stream actually just brought this up. Maryland said that these Russian ads are not intended to influence opinion. They are doing it to make money. Absolutely, positively. That's what I was just about to touch on, Maryland. If Bernie actually read the indictment, which he might have, he might not have. If he read the indictments, then he would know that there was no nefarious plot. He would know that, well, what was the most talked about topic during 2016? The presidential election. If you knew anything about social media and marketing, what 3 people gained their popularity through social media marketing? Donald Trump, Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton was possibly amongst the most hated person on social media. Seriously. And she didn't really have as solid as a following as people thought. Out of all of her followers on Twitter, more like 60% were considered fake bots. But the point is, if I'm advertising for something, you have to have followers to reach. How do you gain those followers? You take advantage of the situation that is given to you, which is 3 people are popular on social media. This one is a bitch and nobody likes her. So we're not gonna bolster them necessarily, but we're gonna go into groups and post a bunch of things that they would all, at the very bare minimum, agree with. For $25 to $30 an ad, by the way. They said that they were bolstering Jill Stein. I still don't even get where that even came from. Once again, if you have any questions about how Facebook groups work, you can reach out to me personally, because just by virtue of being a journalist, we oftentimes get added as administration or admins to all of these groups. At one point in time, I was an admin to like 60 groups. I'm not even exaggerating. You have to go through an approval process. Now you have to even answer questions, but you have to go through an approval process, and somebody has to add you into that group. In the moment you posted something that was scandalous or unverified, a lot of the times, not only would it get taken out, but you would get removed from the group. Now, if Bernie Sanders was actively involved in social media, which I don't expect him to be at 76, 77 years old, he would probably know this. But the one weakness of Bernie Sanders that I have noticed, and I've noticed this and said this since I started working for him. When I used to work for him when I was president of College Students for Bernie, or at least work for his campaign. He can be naive, which is probably one of the biggest faults of an activist in general, that he has an activist's heart, if you will. He thinks that people generally and genuinely want the best for the country and the best for the rest of the world, simply because they say it. Their actions don't follow, but they say it, and a lot of times Bernie will believe them, and that's based off of a history. That's his biggest fault. Now, I will say that luckily, even though it's his biggest fault, he is still firmly and strongly anti-war. And on top of that, he is all about making sure that veterans who have been to war already are taken care of. So he may be naive in some ways, but luckily Bernie Sanders would not have to run the country by himself if he won. Hopefully he would put progressives in office. But that is my biggest fear, is that if Bernie won, then he would end up with an establishment administration. Or perhaps he would literally flip the script on everybody unexpectedly and handle business. I don't know yet. And the reason why I don't know is because of the rest of this interview, which we want to listen to, and these tweets that he did. Now, Politicore on YouTube said that Bernie wants what's best for the war industry. I would have to firmly disagree with that. I think that Bernie is naive, and on top of Bernie being naive, we didn't have access to the amount of information and the amount of hindsight that we have until very, very recently. Bernie was outside of the establishment as an independent. He worked side by side with Republicans and Democrats for a long time, but he was outside of the establishment. If Bernie was doing what was best for the war industry, Bernie Sanders would have been put to the forefront like all of the other war profiteers, like the Clintons, like the Mitt Romneys, like the John Kerrys of the world. When you're doing your job, you don't get spotlight when you're a politician. I use this example often. Congresswoman Murphy is a national level House representative from Florida, based out of Orlando. She actually has a Justice Democrat running against her right now, which is really weird. But that's a different discussion for a different day. She's extremely progressive. She is always on the right side of a vote and actively pushing legislation that would help the country. You'll have no idea who she is, do you? And you never will, because she does what she's supposed to do. If Bernie Sanders was pushing the war profiteering, complex, then pushing it, not succumbing to it, but pushing it, he would be put in the forefront. Now, his naivety is what hurts him. Because before I had my eyes awoken, maybe 10 years ago, I thought that Israel was the victim. Because that's what I had been told, because we didn't have the amount of social media interaction and experiential interactions with other people as we have right now. I would say, 9/11 and then the war in Iraq. I actually was always against the war in Iraq, but I at least said that maybe we should be in Afghanistan if what had been told to us was true. We eventually found out that that wasn't true, right? But did you know where to look to find out if something was true or false? And back then, if you said something, if you questioned the legitimacy of the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan, you would lose your job. In the military, you would be kicked out. If you were an officer, you would be in jail and kicked out. First, you would go to jail, then you'd be kicked out. And that was across party lines. At one point in Bernie Sanders' career, he's been around a lot. He's been in Congress and the Senate longer than I've been alive. And at one point, all of us succumb to the ideal that if people have a consensus on it, then that is the reality of it. I've studied Bernie's his policy advocation. And I even noticed where, like, for example, one of the things that I strongly disagreed with was when he approved of rockets on the Gaza Strip. But when I looked at the date of when he approved that, once again, he was basing this off of the intel that was being given to him during a time where we thought we could trust our intelligence community. During a time where many of us thought that, most of us even, thought that Israel was the victim. And he's advocated for, like, the war in Afghanistan. We thought that Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were in Afghanistan. The only thing that I would say that would look suspicious to me, which once again I had to check this one out, is when he passed legislation that appeared to be giving more money to the military for the complex. However, it wasn't. It was actually a legislation that ensured that when soldiers came back or when they got out the military, that they would be sufficiently taken care of. Funny enough, he actually had to fight with both the establishment Republicans and the establishment Democrats to get that passed, because it was allocating money from the defense budget, because the veterans we don't have that much money allocated towards us, to put put it quite frankly. So he was a victim of his time period. And he's also a victim of age and bad habit. Naivety can be dangerous if you don't have the right people around you. And that's what I am worried about. I'm worried that Bernie in the long run does not have the right people around him, or he's making concessions now that could hurt him later. And I'm explaining a little bit more about that in a second. Let's go ahead and go listen to the rest of this interview, and then look at the tweets.
And it turns out that one of our social media guys in San Diego actually went to the Clinton campaign in September and said something weird is going on. Bernie's not in the campaign. Hundreds of these people are now coming onto his Facebook site. So I think we already knew that. It was an effort to undermine American democracy and to really say horrible things about Secretary Clinton.
Do you have an idea of how to prevent this going forward? I mean, this was a sophisticated, so they basically used the divide of the Democratic Party between you and Secretary Clinton at the
sophisticated. This was sophisticated, people. Going into group, I can literally create a fake profile right now. I got a bunch of creative names, okay, that I can use for my Google accounts, and I can literally create fake profiles and post a bunch of bullshit and do it for free. There's nothing sophisticated about that attack, but let's continue.
Time to polarize things even more.
Right. Look, first of all, the main point to be understood is that what everybody understands, except Donald Trump, is that this was not just the 2016 campaign. They intend to do this in 2018. And I think one of the weirdest things in modern American history is you have every intelligence agency, you have the Mueller report, you have Trump's own administration saying the Republicans want to sabotage the 2018 campaign. Everybody knows this except...
Well, he said Republicans want to sabotage it, but I think he meant Russians. Now, he says that the Mueller report says that the Russians want to sabotage more elections. And I'm just like, where the hell are y'all getting these reports from? That's my question to Bernie. I love the man to death. I think he has a good heart and I think he has the best intentions, but that does not change the fact that you're basing your analysis right now off of a report that hasn't even been proven or verified. What report? You know, Tucker Carlson asked Adam Schiff, who is the head of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. He said, you know what? If what you're saying is true, look the camera dead on and say, we can say for a fact that Russia rigged the election, specifically the Russian government, for Donald Trump. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say it. No one, not Bernie, not Chuck Todd, not anybody, can even say at this very moment that the Russian government was involved, even after the 13 indictments. Because why? That's right. It didn't say shit about the Russian government, people. It doesn't talk about the Russian government. It actually specific, and not only does it not talk about the Russian government, but it goes out of its way to say that it wasn't involved, or these Russians were not involved with the campaign. Here's where it gets even better. This company was started in 2012. I guess they started being active in 2014. That would mean, because remember, once again, the entire premise of this whole investigation, people, by the way, after this is all said and done, we really need to have a sit down with our representatives and ask what the fuck is the jurisdiction of a special counsel. Because they just went and prosecuted someone from 2014, and their whole argument was, well, they wanted to work with Trump. They wanted to elevate Trump. Trump hadn't even announced in 2014. Bernie Sanders did not announce in 2014, nor did Hillary Clinton. And in your report, if you had said they had met with the Trump administration prior to his announcement, we found proof of this, and this is why we're in. No. You just made people, that indictment was one of the most xenophobic pieces of shit I have ever read. There was zero connection to the Russian government. Zero connection to Vladimir Putin. Zero connection to KGB. Zero connection to Trump's administration. And even the vice president of Facebook came out and said, I saw the ads, which, by the way, were after the 2016 election. After. Would y'all like me to read the tweet? Because I can read you the tweet as well if you want. Matter of fact, I think I could pull it up. But the vice president of Facebook said that they were after the 2016 election, and that he can say with confidence that had nothing to do, like their goals for those ads had nothing to do with trying to sway the outcome of the election from Facebook. And yet, for some reason, Bernie and the establishment wants to keep pushing the narrative that Russia, the government, was trying to influence our elections because Russians who have their own independent LLC in St. Petersburg, Virginia, tried to rig the election. That makes no sense. It's xenophobic. On the live stream this morning, I was given the example of can you, if a black person somewhere committed say if this was the 60s and a black person somewhere committed a crime, and they were like, if a black person committed the crime, all black people are guilty. Can you imagine that everybody lashed out at every single white person because one white person committed a mass murder? Clearly, because like Dylan Roof, for example. Did everybody go after every single white person after he killed those black people? In the name of white supremacy, by the way. No, why? Because he was an independent actor, and there was no legitimate connection to an extremist group that he was a part of. Saying we should fear all white men, all white teenagers because of the actions of this one is ridiculous. And that's after an established pattern. I will still never say anything like that. Even though there's an established pattern of white teenagers killing a bunch of people, I would still never, because it's an individual actor and it does not deal with the root of the problem. It is the same thing. Oh, they're Russian, they're on the computer, and they're doing the same thing that millionaires and billionaire investors do in the middle of a Russian tech boom. By the way, if you didn't know, that industry right now is actually very, very popular in Russia. It's actually very popular all over the world because it's a great source of income, believe it or not. You know who also has one of these farms, if you will? Bot ad farms? Mark Cuban, the billionaire owner for the Dallas Mavericks. He has one of these farms. Is he a Russian troll? I don't think so. You have to, Bernie needs to really take a step back. Now, I want to address these tweets because the tweets are a little bit peculiar. So many people are upset, right? at the things that he has been tweeting from his Bernie Sanders account. Not the Senator Sanders account, but the Bernie Sanders account. I want to point out one important factor that many people totally ignore. Because as much as Bernie pisses me off when he gets on TV and says some of the rhetoric that he says, I also, like I said, I understand that he is put in a situation where if he legitimately wants to win. And if I'm almost 80 years old, I've been putting my time, my family's time, my efforts, my energy into winning so that I can make definitive and effective change in American politics. Then all of a sudden, you become a little bit more compromising. Especially whenever there's a duopoly and you got to figure out how to fit into one of those before you can actually get elected, and before the clock runs out. And I actually believe that not his Senator Sanders account, people, but his quote unquote Twitter account, the Bernie Sanders account, I don't think it's his account. Why would I say that? Well, I'll tell you. The first thing it says on his account, on the bio, is that the tweets are by his staff. And it's not even his staff, by staff. So there is a good possibility that this is just a Democratic establishment co-option account. And I'm going to explain why. Look at these tweets. First of all, Bernie Sanders doesn't even talk like a lot of these tweets suggest. But hey. So the first tweet is... Well, actually, let me go in order. The first couple of... I'm going to go from 5 days ago then to one to yesterday. So Bernie said... this account said... It's been clear to everyone except Donald Trump that Russia was deeply involved in the 2016 election and intends to be involved in 2018. It is the American people who should be deciding the political future of our country, not Mr. Putin. And so that is actually in the Russian oligarch. So that's actually a direct quote. That was Bernie. So they took that from the interview that he did and did a direct quote about it. And then they also said it is absolutely imperative that the Mueller investigation be allowed to go forward without obstruction from Mr. Trump or from the Trump administration and Congress. I don't really know why he said that, because no one is trying to interrupt the investigation. So, but that's, once again, that's weird. But that was a quote from back when James Comey and that whole beef whenever Mueller was on the verge of getting fired. That's where that quote came from. I remember it. I was pissed. But they wrote it again 5 days ago. But once again, that was not Bernie Sanders who wrote it. Now, here's the next. Here's where the tweets start pissing me off, quite frankly. What the Russians did in the 2016 election cycle deserves unconditional condemnation. That includes all of their conduct, whether it was active support of any candidate or active opposition to any candidate. Now, I am not a linguist by any means, but I do have ADHD. In all seriousness, And one of the things about having ADHD is you get this heightened sense of what's called phonic awareness. So like when something is off about the syntax of a sentence, the way a word is being pronounced or not being pronounced, if something is missing, then you become instantly aware of it. If somebody words something weirdly, you're instantly aware of it. That is not Bernie Sanders talking. Whether it was active support of any candidate or active opposition to any candidate. Let's go to the next tweet. As someone who campaigned hard for Hillary Clinton from one end of this country to another, It is an outrage that she had to run not only against Donald Trump, but also against the Russian government. What? Now, obviously, he tweeted this in the wake of the indictments being released. But let's be very clear about something. That tweet was like a followers, believe me, if you will. Like, my supporters, believe me. I campaign for her. Like, why are you reiterating that you campaigned for Hillary Clinton? I am with you all that he is making concessions because he is being forced to make concessions. You're not going to get really any disagreement out of me there, because I 100% think that not necessarily that his family's been threatened, but matter of fact, okay, here's another thing. This is from the Bernie Sanders account, once again, not by Bernie Sanders. Mueller's indictment provides further evidence that the Russian government interfered in 2016. No, it does not. It also shows that they tried to turn my supporters against Hillary Clinton in the primary and the general elections. No, it did not. And I unequivocally condemn such interference. That was not tweeted by Bernie Sanders, people. If it is tweeted by Bernie Sanders, there is a dash and a B to let you know that it was, in fact, Bernie Sanders who tweeted it. That was not him, but the thing is, they are making it seem as if it is him, which is a red flag to me. Why not speak in third person? Why make it so? Why do you make it so personal, as if you are trying to invoke a reaction out of people to be like, well, if Bernie's saying it and he's making it such a personal thing, then maybe it's true. The findings of Robert Mueller's investigation must be taken seriously at every level of government, and he must be allowed to. Yeah, I already talked about that. Now let's go to Jane's page. I love Jane. I've always felt like Jane is Bernie's conscience, but that he can't always reveal. Jane's page talking about the NRA and gun violence. Okay. Talking about student debt and cancellation. Talking about tax breaks for the rich. Future transportation, DACA, Dreamers, Sanders Institute. So interesting to me. Now, as you all know, Jane Sanders is not one to shy away from political controversy or political conversations in general. Right? We all know that. If you know Jane Sanders, you better know that. Not only that, but she has never been shy about endorsing her husband's political positions, his genuine political positions. This is why I become extremely suspicious about how his accounts are being ran and about how his rhetoric is on like establishment broadcasts. I just went through about a month or so of tweets from Jane. Not one mention of Russia. Now, like I said, the fact that Jane is not at all, even a little bit, talking about Russia, however, constantly reiterating the things that Sanders fights for and has been known to fight for, should be a hint that we should probably take a step back and see what the hell is going on. Will we ever know for a fact? No. But I can tell you that The Democratic Party has very strict rules when it comes to running for them. And the truth of the matter is, you're going to have to play by their rules. And if you don't, they'll make it seem as if you're not acting within the interests of the Democratic Party. And yeah, what he could do is sue. But when you're 76, 77 years old, suing, 76, 77 years old and trying to make change today. Not tomorrow, but today. You are not trying to sue your way into change, because that could be stretched out forever. Then it can be dismissed. You can just never hear about it again. Now, I don't know if y'all have seen this pattern, but the only time that not only Jane, but Jane, Levy, his son, and Nina Turner have all not been on the same page. 2 times where Bernie tweets something out, he does something sensational, he gives an amazing speech about one of his policy stances, they're retweeting it, they're talking about it, they're reiterating it. The 3 heavy hitters, if you will. Those 3. Levy, who was his son, Jane Sanders, and Nina Turner. They're always on the same page. But the 2 times they have not been on the same page, when he endorsed Hillary Clinton, and very specifically, when once he endorsed Hillary Clinton, Jane Sanders tweeted and pinned the clip where Bernie said, "If I tell you who to vote for, don't listen to me." And this time, Jane does not speak of Russia, doesn't bring it up. Levy doesn't speak of Russia, doesn't bring it up. And Nina, I think she's spoken about it every now and then. I'm sure, she's spoken about it once or twice in the context of, yes, Russia does meddle in governments, but that's not what causes situation. So stop scapegoating them. I would even argue that if Bernie or anybody else in the establishment wanted to make the point that because Trump is president, he should call out meddling, then make sure we do it across the board. Make sure we talk about Saudi Arabia. Make sure we talk about Israel. Make sure we talk about Qatar. Make sure that we talk about really the British Empire and the royal family. Make sure we talk about the black market and its influence. If we're going, let's talk about human trafficking, right? Which seems to be something that is refused to be talked about in the government, which is probably why it exists at such a ridiculous level now. If you're going to say the president's job is to call out anybody who pisses us off, anybody who does anything wrong, then let's stand by that. Because the one thing that Trump has done, now I'm not necessarily a fan of it, but one thing that he has done is anybody who he thinks is legitimately against our interests, he does call them out. Whether it was Iran, Kim Jong-un in North Korea. If he thinks you're against our interests, whether it's true or not, you can have an argument about that. But if he thinks you're against our interests, he will call you out. He will call you out. But what Bernie and other people are advocating for, like Thomas Friedman when I was talking to y'all this morning, is for him to just call out any and every instance. That's, first of all, that's not even it's not even strategical. Like, why would you do that? You can't let everybody know that you. I don't wake up in the morning or go to sleep worrying about Russians. I don't wake up worrying about Russians. I wake up worrying about healthcare. Not for myself, but for everyone else. I wake up worried about gun violence, but not gun violence in the sense of, oh, let's get rid of everybody's guns. I wake up worried about gun violence because I understand that the root of mass murders does not come at the barrel of a gun, but it starts with good policy application. Economically, healthcare-wise, education. If people had opportunity, I guarantee, and if they had opportunity and a better way to deal with their mental issues and the stressors that come from the lack of opportunity, economically or otherwise, in this country, we wouldn't see mass murders at the rate that we do. That's what I go to sleep worrying about. I go to sleep worrying about election rigging. It's so interesting to me, once again, that Bernie, in these scenarios, only in these two scenarios with the fake Twitter account, I call it fake because it's not Bernie Sanders tweeting. Like, it's not him. And the appearances on the establishment media, he says that Donald Trump should call this out because of their interference with our elections. Well, you goddamn right, Bernie. Since we're talking about elections, how about we talk about the election rigging? And since we're talking about it doesn't matter if it was active opposition to yourself or your opponent, how about we talk about the active opposition from Hillary Clinton's campaign that we have found, that has been proven? If there was clear evidence of Russia infiltrating our elections at a legitimate level, not some fucking farm, but if there was proof of that, I'm serious, if there was proof of it, you would have no problem getting everyone to unite. If there was proof and then there was a clear, like, goal, you can't just tell me something is happening and not give me a goal. That's why I can't call Bernie Sanders a sellout, because I know that he's doing something that I don't approve of, but there has to be a goal at the end. If you think a 77-year-old is all of a sudden wanting to be a billionaire, that logic doesn't check out. If he had a history of that type of behavior, then yes. The logic doesn't check out if you think a 76-year-old or 77-year-old wants to be a billionaire. That doesn't make any sense. But there still has to be a goal, because this is contradictory to what we are accustomed to seeing Bernie Sanders act like. What it looks like, if you ask me, on his Twitter account, he got a PR guy running that shit. And it's probably part of the agreement. Hey, you can keep fighting in the House. You can, do whatever you want to do. Say whatever you want to say. You better back this Russia shit. You better back the Syria shit. If you want a chance at all to run in this party in 2020, you better do what we say. And I think that he is playing ball until the party keeps losing more and more power, which is realistic. And he's also and I hate to be so morbid, but quite frankly, he's racing the clock, and people keep forgetting that. So I am not happy with Bernie's rhetoric, but at the same time, we have to understand that this entire situation is much more nuanced than people want to admit. People who just automatically assume that Bernie he's the establishment. No, but he's fighting against an establishment by himself. You all are forgetting, even though Trump made it easy for them to fight against him. But they took Donald Trump, right? He said some racist stuff. Absolutely. He said some stupid stuff. He said some sexist stuff. He's done some stupid things. He's done some criminal things. But they took all of that, brought in Russia somehow, and said, clearly because of all the things that happened over on this side of the fence, it's obvious Trump colluded with Russia. That's exactly how all this happened. That was his goal, period, in the long run. Like, that's what he always planned on doing. And that was Donald Trump, who hates or who's lambasted anything that even looks close to communism. Now imagine being the democratic socialist. Imagine being the one saying we need to make sure that our government takes care of people and that they should be a little bit more involved in the betterment of people instead of pretty much limiting people's rights. Imagine being the one who is there. Remember they started the rumor that Bernie wanted a 90% income tax rate, which was totally untrue. And even though he had said it was untrue, people still believed it. The Republicans were still saying it. Even some Democrats were saying it. His tax rates were unbelievable, but they actually weren't. Actually, in some cases, he even lowered taxes for a lot of people. Now, how easy do you think it would be to get the country to turn on Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Socialist? All he has to do, all he would have to say is that, hey, we don't have the proof, so until we have the proof, I can't really speak on that. Oh, you can't speak? Oh, so that means you can't get in front of the camera either, huh? If you can't get in front of the camera, there's no point you're running for president. Matter of fact, we'll go ahead and just scratch you. We'll just make sure you can't run. Am I happy with it? No. Am I upset with it? Yeah. Do I understand it? Kind of. Will the end justify the means? Well, I think that's something that we're going to have to wait to figure out. But you can't look at somebody who has established a pattern of behavior, mostly good, and then when he does something for the first time completely out of character and is being pushed to the forefront for it, you can't look at him and his conversations and the couple of times that he chooses to talk about Russia every couple of months. You can't look at that in a vacuum. You have to look at everything. Clearly, like I said, his tweets aren't coming from him. His wife isn't echoing him. His son isn't echoing him. His right-hand woman, and Nina Turner, is not echoing him. Tulsi Gabbard, all the people that ran beside him during the election, who still support him, by the way, are not echoing his sentiments, which means he's going at this alone for some reason and not asking them to follow him in his rhetoric. It sucks, but like I said, hopefully the ends justify the means. But those tweets, whoever's in charge of that account, he needs to get them off, because that shit is dangerous. Period, point blank. Because it's not true. Those are lies. On that Twitter account, like I said, that account is by his staffers. It even says it clearly. And then anything that Bernie Sanders personally tweets, he puts his initials by it. And if he's going to continue to let them use his account, they're going to just continue to denigrate his legacy. Because it is that. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I greatly appreciate you all tuning in. Our show for American Freedom Radio is this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay? It'll be till 9. 7 to 8 is me blah blah blah. And 8 to 9, I'll be taking phone calls. So I look forward to that. I'm excited. Make sure that you tune in, and always remember, ladies and gentlemen, find your balance. Peace.